Thank you for listening and supporting the Daily Memphian. Sign up for one of our many free newsletters and breaking news alerts at dailymemphian.com/email to receive the latest local news stories impacting our community. Our weekly newsletters cover everything from sports to arts and culture, business, food, and more, along with daily updates of all the news we publish each day. Sign up or manage your email preferences at dailymemphian.com/email.
I'm Bill Dries with the Daily Memphian. We are talking with Dr. Earle Fisher, co-founder of UpTheVote 901 and the People's Convention. This is On the Record. We record this Wednesday, April 6th, 2022. And we're here to talk about specifically the latest gathering of the People's Convention that was revived in 2019 ahead of city elections that year, and against the backdrop of a new activism in city politics that by then had been underway for several years. Dr. Fisher, the next gathering is what is called a People's Primary, I think in one of the flyers I saw. The event is on April the 23rd. So tell me what this is all about.
First, let me say thanks for having me again. And I appreciate the work that you are doing. And I especially appreciate the way that you have framed what we have been doing up to this point. We did relaunch the People's Convention. It was an ode to the 1991 convention in 2019. And that was the municipal election, as you have stated. This one, and part of the reason why we're calling it the People's Primary is because it's in the middle of the primary elections for the Shelby County governmental seats. And we believe it's important because in Shelby County, most of the time, a lot of these countywide seats and races are decided at the primary level much more than the general election. And so in order to give the people an opportunity to vet some of the candidates, even within the party prior to the general election, we thought it would be important to put together the People's Primary for the Shelby County general election. It'll be April 23rd at 11 o'clock at the National Civil Rights Museum.
All right, the National Civil Rights Museum. And now in 2019, the way this worked was that the group assembled there and people who were watching remotely too. It was held at the
Paradise Entertainment Center.
That's right, Paradise Entertainment Center, the old Club Paradise. And you heard from the candidates, and then there was some balloting that went on to determine who would get the endorsement of the group. Is that how it works this time?
Yes, very similar to that, a mock election of sorts, and we'll report the results of that election to the masses and let them know like who came out of the People's Convention with what is subsequent to an endorsement.
Okay, and tell me again what this endorsement means, because once the elections are over and the totals are added up, there are a lot of politicos who go back and look at endorsement slates and judge them, I think, kind of superficially based on who won and who lost. So what does an endorsement from the People's Convention mean or signify in your view?
So I think it signifies the people who are committed to advancing agenda items in their political office that are consistent with the way the majority of the citizens feel about issues, because we build our organization on issue-based organizing, and we build our agenda on what the people who we have surveyed said are the things that are important to them and things that we have wanted to see. So I agree with you that much of the armchair quarterbacking and Monday morning quarterbacking that goes on after the elections and tries to describe which endorsements had which influence generally seem to be more about pundits trying to pick and choose which organizations they want to support and which ones they want to try to diminish, as opposed to just talking about the complicated realities of what endorsements actually do. Certain people say, for individual endorsements, they're just an endorsement of one, but we're an organization that represents several different networks, several different organizations that have been in conversation about voter access, voter education, voter engagement, voter information, and most of all, adequate representation. And so I think what ours represents is who are the people who you would be able to trust in office to act in a way that is in the best interest of the majority of the citizens. And I think based upon what came out of 2019, the people who participated in the People's Convention, the people who won elected office from the People's Convention last time, you've seen them govern in ways that have been different from people who either tried to shun or dismiss the convention altogether, or the people who refused to participate and just didn't agree to the platform.
Okay, I know this tally changes as we get closer to the event, but I think the last tally was you had about 15 of the candidates for office confirmed to appear there. Do you have the 3 contenders for District Attorney General in the Democratic primary?
We have 2. All 3 were invited. And when I last spoke to Attorney Linda Harris, she said that after much prayer and reflection, she did not feel led to participate. And so we honor and affirm her decision.
All right. The reason I ask it is the next question, and that is, can all of the forces that are out there pushing for change in the criminal justice system that may have divided themselves up among these 3 Democratic contenders, can those folks in the different camps unite behind the winner of the primary for district attorney, do you think, after this is all over?
Yeah, I do. And I think that this is an opportunity to improve the likelihood of that happening. This is an opportunity for people to engage candidates on the merits and see where candidates are similar insofar as their platforms, to see where they differ. And this is definitely one where I think the contenders and the candidates get to come out and have a mutual respect for people who are willing to submit to this particular type of process. I think, again, to echo a point that I was making earlier, when people end around these types of caucuses, if you will, I think it signifies a lack of commitment to, generally speaking, not everybody, but generally speaking, I think it speaks to a lack of capacity to actually turn people out and be competitive in a general election. But I think it also speaks to a lack of particular consciousness about issues and where people stand on the issues. And part of what gave rise to Up the Vote 901 is this frustration and disdain with people who are seeking elected office, but don't want to expand the electorate, don't want to engage the electorate, and definitely don't want a better informed and empowered electorate. So I think that those candidates that participate in the convention, this convention and in the conventions to come, and in particular, these candidates that are going for district attorney can definitely come out of this and unify, because they would have had, I think, more interaction with each other on level playing fields than they would have had if we did not have the convention.
At the outset of the gathering on April 23rd, what do you think the state of the city's new activism, as I've talked about, over the last 6 to 8 years, what do you think the state of that is, depending on where you mark the start of it?
Well, I don't know. I think that's a question that might be beyond my pay grade. I think what I have been committed to is being in relationship with people who have been trying to push that activism forward. And it's not activism for activism's sake. This is activism that is deeply inspired by love and commitment to justice and equity and access to, the ballot box, access to economic opportunities, a robust change in the criminal injustice system, and a new outlook on how people approach elected office. So I think that there has been some significant changes and opportunities and events. I think this might be one within the catalog of the larger ones. I'm not sure, I'll leave it to people in your field to determine exactly what the impact of these events and this type of activism has been, or what the state of the city will be. I think I could say this confidently, though, and I think you would agree with this too, Brother Bill. I don't think we would see much of the legislation that we have seen in the last several years if it had not been for the activism that was happening on the ground. You would not have body cameras on police officers, most likely. You would not have most of what we have proposed as criminal justice reform initiatives, from the 8 bullet points that Mayor Strickland's office proposed and watered down. You wouldn't have the $15 an hour minimum wage at both the city and the county level. You wouldn't have some of the reforms around pilots. These are all things that people went to bat for on the ground at the grassroots level, that people did protest demonstrations for. You wouldn't have some of the funds that have gone to some of these organizations and institutions, both institutions of higher education and both some of these grassroots organizations that are doing work of racial reconciliation and justice and all of that other stuff. So I think it's undeniable the impact that has been had. But again, I'm not sure we can just say what the state of the city or the county will be by this time on the 23rd.
Mm-hmm. And part of that arc of activity is that you and others have gotten involved in elections, what I call retail politics. In your case, through UpTheVote 901, which is a nonpartisan effort whose goal is to increase voter turnout. Other activists have taken the plunge, of course, as candidates for elected office. What's your view on that transition? Because it's not, by far, it's not the easiest transition to make.
Yeah, and I don't think we've seen a lot of people successfully make that transition. I think, we could point to people like Commissioner Tammy Sawyer. Some, depending upon the perspective, might say City Council person Michael and Easter Thomas. There are some people who have made it. There are some people who are in the process of making it. And I do think that is a major leap. It requires a certain level of commitment and insight beyond what people just do in terms of activism, because there's certain things about public policy. There's certain things about Robert's Rule of Order, and other retail politics, as you pointed out, other retail politic practices that you have to be familiar with. I think what's most important for me in that regard is that people understand when you come from the community, you don't come from necessarily just the private sector or big business and corporation. When you have to deal with what we might refer to as the written grind of everyday people, and when you have to sit with what's happening in some of these communities that are dilapidated and have been disinvested from, I think people tend to govern differently. And so often, and we see this especially at the state level in Nashville and all throughout the country and all throughout the federal system as well, when the people who are governing don't share that philosophy and perspective generally, it makes it more difficult for everyday people to get access to the programs and the type of policies that we need. This is, municipal level, county level, state level, and federal level. These are people who come from the farm leagues of big business, or the farm leagues of philanthropy, maybe, or the farm leagues of the private sector. And they govern in ways that are insensitive to and inconsistent with the daily realities of people in Black communities, most often, especially poor Black communities and working class Black communities. So what we have to be willing to do as a community is cultivate and curate some of these elected officials in ways that make them more sensitive to these daily realities of everyday people. So sometimes that means people who are activists and organizers. Sometimes it means people who have been in the school system and been in the classroom. Sometimes it means people who have been janitors or, mopping floors or dusting off kitchen counters and tabletops and stuff like that. So I think the more we get the diversity of experience in these positions of power, I think the better off we'll be, because we'll see a wider range and array of public policies and philosophies that take into account what's happening to people on the ground every day.
All right. And the election, as you mentioned, the election coming up in May, these are the county primaries, Democratic and Republican, which makes this People's Convention different than the 2019 one, because, of course, city elections are nonpartisan. The candidates who have agreed to come and talk to the convention, are there Democrats and Republican primary contenders in there?
Well, I know this might sound strange and ironic, but regardless of who we extended the invitation to on the right, no one on the right has accepted. Go figure. But I would say this, UpTheVote 901 is not bipartisan, we're nonpartisan. So, we are concentrating primarily on those seats and those sectors of the community that are heavily influential, but also heavily African American. So, we don't have time to deal with every county commission seat. I think we're looking at commission districts 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 11, 12. These are where the majority of the Black people will be. But that doesn't mean that if there is a candidate on the right that is interested in participating or wants to attend, that they wouldn't be invited. But I can tell you explicitly that we extended an invitation to the incumbent district attorney, who is a Republican, and just have yet to hear back from her. But that doesn't mean that we've heard back from everybody who we've invited on the left either. Certain people just don't seem to think that this is most advantageous to their campaign. So we have to make the decisions and we move forward the way we move forward.
Mm-hmm. The other point, as you know, redistricting this year for the Shelby County Commission, and there were some major changes in those district lines, in part to create a new Cordova district, which is the District 5 Commission district, which has no incumbent in it.
Right.
What do you think is going to happen with that seat? And will those attending the convention hear from what's a pretty large field of contenders in the Democratic primary?
Yes, so we have reached out to several of the candidates in that district. Now, regretfully, there are certain candidates in that district that are running for office that, their information is hard to find. Bill, if you have some emails on all of them, I would definitely, even though, the deadline was technically last Friday, we extended it to try to accommodate some of the other candidates who are interested and had to try to move some things around. But, if you can help us get in contact with them, we want to invite all of them. But we have already confirmed, I think, 3 or 4 people from the District 5 race. So I think that, that encounter with those candidates would give the people of that district a better vantage point on who they want to see in that seat. So this is exactly why we put the convention together at the time in which we did, because people on the 23rd, unlike the election or unlike the convention in 2019, which was held several weeks before the early voting period had even started, let alone the general election, we are doing this on the last Saturday of early voting. People will be able to leave from the National Civil Rights Museum and go straight to the ballot box that day, the nearest ballot box. So that's one of the strategies that we try to employ or deploy with having it on April the 23rd.
Right. And this is a good point to remind people that early voting in advance of the May 3rd election day will be April the 13th through April the 28th. UpTheVote is among the plaintiffs in a lawsuit filed earlier this month seeking to make changes in how many early voting sites are open on the first 2 days of the April period, April 13th and April 14th. Tell me again why it is important to have more voting sites open from the first day of the 2-week period in an election cycle that historically has had a low turnout.
Right. So thanks for that. And salute to those partners, especially the Black Clergy Collaborative of Memphis and Dr. J. Lawrence Turner and the NAACP Memphis branch and Attorney Van Turner, who's also a commissioner for, going out on a limb. All of us are going out on a limb trying to make sure that this happens, because to your point, Bill, these elections have been historically low in turnout. I mean, as low as 10% of registered voters have participated in county primary elections. And what we started to see back in 2018, when we started doing some of this UpTheVote work, was a significant increase in turnout. And part of the reason we saw an increase is because there was more access to more sites for early voting. We set a record a couple of years ago, if I'm not mistaken. We increased early voter turnout the first few days by like 123%. And what the Election Commission sought to do in response to this is not open up more sites, but open up fewer sites. We've been in court about this stuff before. And so it's frustrating in a sense, and I was even sharing this with one of the news outlets who I interviewed with earlier. I mean, you would think that the Election Commission would be engaged in ensuring that there's an abundance of access. But more recently, it seems like the Election Commission is hell-bent on and committed to making sure there's a scarcity of access, especially in some of the communities that need representation and access the most. You know this as well as anybody, Bill. One of the most politically engaged sectors of the community and of the city and of the county is Whitehaven. You mean to tell me no early voting site in Whitehaven for the first 3 days? And the rationale of it being Holy Week and pastors not wanting to have their church open just does not pass the smell test, because we have pastors on public record saying they want their churches open and they want their people to have access. So yeah, we had to file a lawsuit. Hopefully it'll be heard sooner rather than later. But in the meanwhile, we have other ways to try to make sure we engage our people, because we want to increase turnout in every election.
And in 2018, there was a similar lawsuit. That one was for the August elections, and it resulted in more early voting sites open on day one and throughout the entire 2-week period for early voting. And UpTheVote 901 in particular, you've kept some meticulous records on measuring efforts in specific areas and specific precincts and what that has done to voter turnout.
Yes. And so what we found was that in these general elections, especially, some of the lowest turnout precincts were Black churches. And so we sought to engage with Black churches. We're in conversation with Black pastors all the time about how to ensure our congregations are engaged and informed, not in a way that tries to direct them on who to vote for, but in a way that gives them the tools so that they can be confident in who they cast their vote in and where they cast their vote and when. So that's part of this effort and initiative as well. Back to the broader point, Bill, it should just be easier for us to have access. You have a city and a county, you have a county of over 600,000 registered voters, and you're going to open up one site downtown for the first 2 days of early voting. Then you're going to open up 5 more sites, but no site in Whitehaven, no site in Hickory Hill, no site in Westwood. And the site that you claim in South Memphis is so close to Midtown that Midtown can claim that site as a Midtown site. So it's just ridiculous, and it reeks of voter suppression. That's something we won't stand for. We're going to do our best to make sure our people are heard from and have adequate access to the ballot.
In this Chancery Court lawsuit, there's been a bit of a holdup because the chancellor it was originally assigned to pointed out that this is an election year for Chancery Court judges, among other judges who are on the August ballot. So I think it's been assigned now to Chancellor Jim Kyle, who is also on the ballot, but so far I haven't seen a recusal notice in the case information on that. Have your attorneys told you that of a specific date when you all are doing court on the injunction on this?
No, they haven't told us that. And, I'm not at liberty to comment on some of the litigation proceedings, but I can say from what I have been informed on, I think everybody that is up on the ballot in August has recused themselves, and they're trying to find another chancellor, I think, outside of the area to take up the case. But either way, we affirm and understand the nature of this and the optics of it. So, I'm not complaining if somebody, does not want to present themselves as somehow biased and not objective as a judge. I know how important that is. What is of equal importance, and to me, what's even more important, is this being expeditiously taken up so that we would know exactly where we stand. Because if we are successful and all of the sites are opened up, we have to start implementing some strategies to make sure people get out. Because I know that there are people in different sectors of the community that would love for them all to be open and there still be low turnout so that they can complain and say, see, there was no need to open them at all. But what I would like to see is a better effort and a more proactive effort sooner from the Election Commission and other partners that want to see an increase in voter turnout take place, so that we're not always waiting until the 11th hour to get information from the Election Commission and then having to respond and scramble to find ways to give our people access and transportation and information and water and all of that other stuff.
All right. A final note, an unrelated note, you are also the pastor of Abyssinian Missionary Baptist Church in Whitehaven. And I believe I saw a social media posting that you just recently have returned to live services in the church.
We did. Last Sunday, this past Sunday, the first Sunday in April was our first Sunday. So we'll be doing hybrid services on first and third Sunday and still doing fully virtual services on the second, fourth, and fifth Sundays, unless otherwise announced.
So what's it like being back in the pulpit and having a crowd there in the church?
Yeah, well, the crowd was modest, and that's to be expected. I think people are still feeling their way through, some of these spaces. I think it takes some getting back used to, Brother Bill. I've been preaching in front of a camera and an empty sanctuary for over 2 years now. And I told my wife, the tiredness that I felt after service this past Sunday was not the same as the tiredness that I had been feeling after, logging on with some of my congregants and chatting with them during the sermon on Facebook Live. So it definitely takes getting used to, but I'm excited about it because it gives us an opportunity to reach more people. We are reaching, probably 3 or 4 times more people than we were reaching pre-pandemic. And it has given us an opportunity to do some really creative things insofar as programs are concerned. And so I'm excited about what is the future of what is affectionately referred to as the Blackest Church of Memphis and Shelby County. Undisputed. Nobody can test us for the title.
All right. We have been talking with Dr. Earle Fisher about the People's Primary, the People's Convention that is coming up on April 23rd at 11 o'clock at the National Civil Rights Museum. That's been the podcast today. I'm Bill Dries, and this has been On the Record.
In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.